So, greetings. This is Griff Ruby with our next part, interviewing Father Ray Steichen. And as we've established in the other two parts, clearly he has the, unassailable credentials, both as a Catholic priest, formed, trained, ordained, and, academically qualified in every sense by the church and by everybody except as the church, because it's all way back when. And also with unassailable credentials as a traditionalist who has staunchly loved and stood by the true Mass throughout this whole time, and seeing to the needs of the souls that have come to his care in any way, shape, or form. And he is obviously someone who doesn't stand to gain anything personally as a priest from my studies. There's anything I can say would add one bit to the stature that everyone is constrained to recognize that he has. But but there are a lot of other concerns that do matter to me a lot, and that has to do with many others who are not in quite such a good position. But I'd like to continue a little bit more on the traditional credential a little bit, and that has to do with traditional books. You've read a good many traditional books, and maybe you might comment on a couple of them. You said you read Attaviana Intervention.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, it's not much to it, but it sure says a lot.
Well, I understand what it was about, yeah.
And it's kind of great that comes from, a cardinal.
They laughed him out of the Vatican.
Well,
they made fun of him, an old duffer.
Yeah, I've heard about that one. They turned off his microphone at Vatican II, and somehow he hadn't noticed, and they giggled at him at that. And it's just shows what so many people were made of there.
Secretary of State, right?
Yeah, just shows what they're made of there, and makes it very believable that so many would choose error, as far as I'm concerned, because they just obviously don't take anything very seriously. But another book that was particularly helpful was Iota Unum. So maybe some things that stood out in that, and you said you had study groups in that.
Iota Unum, what impressed me the most was that Paul VI let go half of the priests in the Catholic Church, and as a favor, to go out into the world as though you were never ordained. Live a lay life.
They were laicized. They were even permitted to marry, I think, weren't they?
Yeah,
You're just like you were never a priest.
As you were never a priest. Now, so that when Paul VI wrote that, I says, well, that's the end. There's nothing left.
Wow.
There's nothing left. Imagine all these priests, they just walked away.
Well, but there was nothing to hold them there because they had no real church to.
Well, they had no real church, but they were not even real. Some of those, I imagine, were real priests. Some of those older.
Yeah, I would imagine, probably given that time frame, probably most of them or many of them were. And I wouldn't be surprised if some did this not because they were tired of the priesthood or wanted to get married per se, but because they just didn't want to have to be responsible for deceiving people with the Novus Ordo nonsense.
Yeah.
And this was their ticket out, and sure, you could get married, but that's probably not what very many of those did. Maybe a few, but by and large, no. Others just said, well, I'm tired of being celibate, let me get married, and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
So there are probably all sorts of reasons, good and bad, that so many would take that offer. But that's kind of an interesting point to come out of that.
Iota Unum is a good book to read if you want to get the real scoop on Vatican II.
Yeah, it sets it apart, showing what the real difference is, isn't it?
And then Animus Stilendi.
Right.
That's what impressed me a lot.
Yeah, Attila Guimarães' series of books. That really drills into a lot of detail.
Oh, sure. It? Well, the desire to destroy the church.
Yeah.
That's one of the things we're geared to destruction.
They really wanted to destroy. They're not just people. They're not just Catholics making some honest mistakes. No. There's a real destructive energy at work here.
But if you want to put a plug in for the greatest book.
Yeah, but this is one other really great book, and he likes
the greatest traditional book that's ever been written on the Holy Eucharist, a key to the doctrine of the Eucharist. Right. I am convinced that Vatican II would not have taken place if the priests and bishops had known this book.
Wow.
That's how
And
he
so
lived.
this is from 1925, so
1925.
it's traditional in the ordinary sense of any writing of, say, any great saint
Yeah.
or mystic. It's
But
not,
it's all
you know,
Thomas Aquinas.
right. I've been looking at it myself, and
Yeah.
yeah, it seems like Thomas Aquinas is about on every page.
Yeah.
And it's great. I love hearing from, you know, the angelic doctor.
Yeah.
The more I hear from him, the more he really has been
Yeah,
growing on
yeah.
me. He really gets into stuff. So that really kind of shows, you know, how important these things are. But in all this kind of reading of most of these books that you've seen, and I'm for the moment excluding
Yeah.
my own, there's still one thing that kind of is rather disturbing. And you've seen all this terrible collapse happen around you. You took a leave of absence that became permanent because you just couldn't handle being part of that anymore. You've read many of these books that have shown how stark the difference is between the Catholic religion and the Novus Ordo religion. And the desire to destroy all of this stuff. And what did it feel like? Didn't it feel like this is the end? It's all over?
It
Didn't you feel
felt
this
like I was lost.
Yeah.
I didn't know where to start. And then one day
Yeah,
I heard about this church in Phelan.
yeah.
And I went over there and I talked to someone in the back, the organist, and I says, I got to see this priest. I would like to help him out. And so I went up to talk to him in the sacristy, and I told him who I was, what I was doing, where I lived. And he says, I'd like to help you. He says, well, he says, let's use our prayer bones. Let's say the rosary,
Okay.
and we'll think about it. And so I went home, and I got a call from him. And he says, Fred, the organist, told me that I had to talk to you and I had to take you in immediately. So come on over Monday afternoon and we'll get started. Yeah,
Wow.
so one person, without that Fred, that Fred became my best friend over there. It was just wonderful.
Phelan, and that's a little town I would have passed on the way here. I saw
Yeah.
that. I remember seeing that name, and I thought, that name of that town sounds familiar.
And it's close to
Yeah.
Hesperia.
Is there somebody still there, some mass that's still there now, or is that that's way back when?
That place is rotted out.
There's nothing
The
left there now.
society took it over.
The Society of what, Pius X?
X, yeah.
Okay, but then they still have it, or did they just buy it?
No,
and
it just
destroy it?
all just disintegrated. It was,
They didn't even keep it going.
no, no.
Oh, well, that just goes to show, even traditional societies can do things that seem to be wrong, and that's a shame, but who knows what their rationales are. But anyway, it's all kind of a despairing situation, and I think that that's kind of, despair is probably a very widespread problem among, any real Catholic. You look around and,
Well,
oh my God.
I despaired until I
Yeah.
got into that church.
Yeah.
And I didn't know where to go.
But that gave you some hope there.
I was left alone to do what I thought was best. The pastor wasn't around. He was in Escondido living. So, I had full run of the church.
So you started out there doing
we
tradition.
built it up to 75 people.
Uh-huh.
A little mobile home.
And then where does the Apple Valley Church come in?
That came in after we lost the mobile home. We had a mobile home
Yeah.
in Victorville in one of the parks.
Oh, okay.
So what year? About 12 years ago.
Okay. So,
And then what happened, it was very strange. They had a sign up, church for sale, or building for sale. There was, what do you call it, Masons, Freemasons, for farmers,
okay.
Grange Hall, they call it.
Oh, Grange Hall, yeah.
So
that's
anyway,
right,
someone warned me, told me about it, and so I called up the Grange Hall, and I told them that I'm interested in that. It's okay, I take your name down, not much interest in me. And then so I got a call that afternoon that I should go over to the lady's house.